Hi, everybody.
Hey Dima. Hey Dmitry.
Hi, guys. Dima, Paul, Madeline, hi.
Hey.
Nice to see you. And welcome to the last panel of today's event, where we're going to talk about the rise of the venture scouting and different programs, different venture scouting programs in Europe, discussing with both VCs and also scouts how different programs work, what are the compensation schemes, how like cooperation models work across different like geographies, and many more. So let me quickly start with introduction. So I'm Dmitry, I'm an investment director at Flashpoint, and I'm honored to moderate this panel. So I'm in Flashpoint, I'm covering our early stage VC fund, and in our early stage VC fund, we're focusing on seed and Series A deals. And lately, we were, as many other funds, we were also swimming upstream, we're looking at more and more early stage deals, doing more seed deals, which requires us to look at bigger number of companies, which ideally should be also like pre-screened, pre-selected by somebody who has access to early stage ecosystem and also strong domain expertise. And this is something that was driving our interest to explore and implement a venture scouting program in Flashpoint. So before we dive further, I would like to introduce speakers. I'll let them introduce themselves. So, ladies first. Madeline, you're from Peak Capital, so we're both on the VC side of the table. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, happy to. Actually, we paid a lot of money rebranding and they removed the capital because people always just called us Peak for 14 years. And now that we've done that, they now call us Peak Capital. So it's one of those funny little instances. But thank you for having me and thank you for the invite. Indeed, I am a VC. So I work with Peak. We're based in Amsterdam, Berlin, and Stockholm. We're a pan-European early stage fund. We actually rolled out our own Venture Scout model a little bit because of who we are as a fund. So we are only backed by founders, so only individual founders or LPs, and also everybody in our team are founders or have been founders themselves. So it was very much in line with our philosophy to put our money where our mouth is and give capital back to people on the ground, because that's our origin and our team composition as well. And I myself, I lead actually our sourcing in DACH, so Germany, Austria, Switzerland. But I also manage our venture program because I have the biggest flair for, I think, the really, really, really early stage, which is what we see with that program. And we have our first cohort that we're wrapping up and already the first quite a few investments from them. So happy to talk about it. Also a bit upset. I wasn't told to bring my cool hat. So I think Dima, it's probably on to you next then.
Thanks, Madeline. Yeah, I did take the hat. Great intro. Personally, myself, I wear many hats, including physical ones. But at the moment, I'm an angel investor for the purpose of this particular panel. And as part of that, I was, helping Dmitry also at Flashpoint with scouting some companies in the Nordics and Baltics. I personally love to invest into founders, and I know a lot of people say that they invest into teams. I don't believe that to be true. I think a lot of people actually don't invest into teams, even though they claim to be. I do like extensive interviews with founders about mindfulness and psychology and philosophy. I have 74 questions that I try to answer for myself to really understand people, and that's how I build my decision-making process, whether I want to go in or not. Beyond that, I'm super interested in future work. So I'm building kind of like a decentralized venture builder, whatever that means. I don't even know yet. So yeah, that's what I do. I like to talk about different life things, but looking at founders is really exciting because I think entrepreneurship is one of the ways how we can change society for the better. So that really excites me. Thanks, Paul. I guess last but not least.
Yeah, exactly. First, thanks Dmitry for having me. Nice to meet you all as well. My name is Paul. I'm a venture scout as well for Flashpoint, but in the same time, I'm a business development manager for the private investment group, where we help companies and funds raise from Middle East, so the GCC area. And in the same time, I was in charge of a platform called The Bridge that connected startups with investors. So I think we can talk on ways to connect the two the two, let's say, parts of the ecosystems quite heavily. I talked with over I think 200 angels, micro VCs from all over the world in the past 2 years, I think, but also founders in the same time, because we needed both parts of the surf marketplace, let's call it. And I think that's about it. Oh yeah, and recently I also started to be an intern as well for a software company in my hometown. I'm trying to learn some software development as well on the side. Always curious about SaaS as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, guys, for the intro. So maybe the first topic is a bit like high-level topic, just to define different types of scouting programs. And after looking at many different scouting programs in both large and reputable firms like Sequoia, for example, as well as smaller but even more promising like Peak and Flashpoint, right? And many other like smaller firms that were expanding their network through different scouting programs. Clearly, we can identify like two groups of like programs. So the first is where venture scouting is at the intersection of angel investing and traditional venture capital, meaning that scouts are empowered to invest money in startups, usually like small tickets like 50K to 100K, sometimes maybe a bit more, on behalf of the venture capital fund, sometimes with full decision-making autonomy. And another type of the programs is where funds decide to kind of internalize scouting as part of their deal flow strategy and platform. And sometimes we also see maybe third group where it's like hybrid, where there is two types of like scouts in the fund. Somebody who is bringing the deal flow, but also they can at some point be promoted to like people with a small pocket can invest like 50 to 100K. So Madeline, you like Peak launched the venture scouting program, I think last year. So you're like now running your first cohort. So it would be great if it's not very confidential, if you can explain how it works at Peak.
No, it's not very confidential. But also in terms of those three buckets, we have actually, in terms of defining what a venture scout program is, we have actually used scouts that are more on sort of a deal by deal basis, or a little bit more of like a long-term relationship that, they sort of reach out with, hey, I have 10 hot leads, and depending on where those go in the pipeline, there would be sort of compensation around that. And I know that that's something that my actually colleague has managed. I think we had one, tried it out in, I think we were doing Poland and also Portugal. So not really our core geographies, but just to see sort of what that would be like. But the venture scout program that we launched last year is really sort of cohort based, wherein we brought together at this time, it was 5 different operators and entrepreneurs, some who have a large angel portfolio and some who are new but want to understand how to do it, and gave them essentially 100K each from our fund. To the idea, rough math was to invest as they please, assuming 4 investments of 25K each. So we have, so we've got one of the first MDs of Uber from Sweden. We've got Emma Tracy, who's awesome. She's the founder of Honeypot, sold it to Xing in Germany. Willem Delbadi was CTO of Team Leader in Belgium. We have one also in the Netherlands. And I feel like I'm forgetting one. 2 in the Netherlands. There we go. And so the way that we structured it in the compensation was a bit difficult. But how we've done it so far is we actually just pool together all the investments. And there's a carry that each of the venture scouts receive, and that's shared throughout all the investments. So if there is a venture scout, for example, there's one who was more sort of participating in the program to try to get involved in venture scouting, hasn't made any investments. So he may then not participate in the carry, but ultimately, if everybody makes 4 investments and some of them are really successful, some are not, that's going to be equally distributed. Yeah, and I do believe we're going to structure it differently, a little bit more on sort of a per deal basis. So there's a higher incentive for them to actually use that venture money for the best deal flow that they see, because there can be a little bit of an adverse incentive if they feel they don't have a big enough upside. But these are all things we're sort of tinkering with right now.
Okay, very interesting. Dima, what do you think is would be the most like balanced approach when it comes to balancing the interest of the scout, the actually the startup, and also the VC firm? And what do you think would be like the sweet spot when it comes to compensation model for you, as you see this?
Yeah, I think, like when it comes to compensation model, it really depends like on identifying your like scout profiles, right? So if you identify scout profiles, let's say, for example, angel investors, right, who put their own money in, right, and then they get basically an increased capital so they can double it up or, increase the money. That's one way to think about it, because then as an angel, I'm already investing money in, I get a bit more. So I'm probably more interested in the carry there, right? Because I'm investing more. At the same time, it's not always the case that only angel investors are your best portfolio, like the best scouts, right? So you can have other entrepreneurs or other scouts, right? So if people are not investing their money, then perhaps individually they might be more interested in receiving some sort of cash payment, whether per deal basis. But then you do have to balance, as you said, like we have to figure out the balance, right? Because what is the motivation? I've seen some venture scouting programs kind of have a model whereby, for instance, they're willing to pay you a certain amount of money, but you need to deliver a certain amount of deals, or like even like leads, so to speak. But there potentially that can be very good, but there are downsides. For instance, what if they just deliver you hundreds of leads that are not going to be any good, right? So that's not really going to help you very much if they simply deliver leads. So I think you're right that it is important to figure out like what's the motivation and what's the interest. Personally, I think like me myself, carry is fine. Cash can also be interesting, but it really depends on for me probably I think the right motivation is actually if I'm not investing, for instance, if cash is involved, then it should be for a successful deal, right? That goes through, that people get the investment goes in, the startups get funding, the investors get a good startup, so then everybody's happy, right? If the deal doesn't happen, right, then you might get into like weird situations where either the scout benefits too much or something else. So I think you do have to be very careful there with selecting the model. I kind of like, Madeline, your approach, right? I actually like the idea of spreading the carry between the scouts. I think that's an interesting way to take a look at it, because as a scout, a VC does not invest so often enough that a scout can guarantee that every year they'll get 2 or 3 deals in, or 1 deal in, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also to flip that script, right? What's also the motivation of the fund to have a scout program? And I think it would very much depend on what sort of Dmitry outlined in terms of those 3 different programs. The sort of first iteration of ours, sort of our proposition towards those scouts were, learn how to maybe professionalize your analyses and your approach as an angel if you already have some investments or if you want to be them. And so we actually have monthly sessions together on different topics. So one is like how to navigate different term sheets between wise notes, safe notes, direct equity, right? What the implications would be if you're doing angel investments in Germany versus the Netherlands, because Germany's fucked. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I always curse when I'm on camera. My apologies. So there's a little bit of also a learning aspect to it. But then they're also sort of asking, and so there's that aspect. There's also a little bit more firepower, or for angels who also do their own investment. Then this could be used as capital to do riskier ones, where they're maybe not as certain to put their own capital in. So there's all different reasons that they would participate in the program. And they always ask us, well, why are you doing it? Because sometimes they've invested in things that we can't. I mean, we invested in a mushroom, so psilocybin, right? A psychedelics company that we wouldn't legally, or we wouldn't, that's software. It's not software, which is what we do. And a little bit for us is, it's of course it's deal flow. So hoping to be front row and maybe do those follow on. It's also a little bit of brand and marketing. I mean, we're only funded and run by founders. So it's a matter of that brand and signaling. It's also a little bit of understanding the geography, getting closer to those scouts as well, who, by the way, 2 of which are now founding new companies, right? So it's also what's really in it, because we don't necessarily look at it like this is going to drive our next unicorn.
Absolutely. And also what I think is the right approach is to find, using different like tools to find a structure that will motivate scout to basically throughout the whole like life cycle. So because we've seen many times that scouts got like discouraged pretty quickly because the conversion into the deal is fairly low in the VC space. Well, Paul, maybe question to you is what you like see, what really drives your interest of being a scout? Because in addition to well, potentially making some money here and monetizing your deal flow and your network, you can also probably learn from VCs, and sometimes venture scouting can be also considered as an entry point maybe to VC. So what do you think about maybe other uh, perks of like scouting programs, and how do you maybe wanted to improve it for yourself?
Yeah. So yeah, for example, I don't have a financial background, so for me, it's it's a bit harder to sort of like entry into this space, and it's something that not necessarily I struggle with, but it's something that I'm working on, and in the same time, I'm quite passionate. I have to say, I'm quite passionate about meeting a lot of founders, getting to help them, talk to them as much as I can, because of course you get a lot of inbound emails, you get a lot of information from all of them, and you try to help them as well. For example, even yesterday there was a startup from Finland, and their message was a bit unclear. What they were doing was quite interesting, but in the same time, they used constantly two names for the product and the companies that they have, and it was a bit confusing, and I gave them some feedback, and it was right afterwards they were saying, yeah, we got that feedback from someone else, and we're working on our pitch deck and we adapted. So for me, it's also like I try to give back as much as possible, but I also like want to learn more about the venture capital world, following whatever is happening in the US, in Europe, newsletters, as well as the recent deals, data on what are the most interesting, let's say, verticals at this moment. I don't know if I answered all your questions, but I hope I did.
May I ask, Paul, because you're representing the scout side here, what sort of investments have you done as a scout?
Well, the thing is, I was, for example, my relationship with Flashpoint is quite recent, I would say. Previously, for example, I was working in the government-backed VC. I was doing a similar job, and I was looking to, for example, mobility startups and renewable energy and that sector. And I managed to have the first investment that the fund did in Romania. Romania didn't have any sort of like success case, let's say, in the mobility space for the fund. Although the fund has made over, I think, 300 or something like that investments all over Europe, I managed to be part of the sort of like the first one in Romania.
And also in that, sorry if I'm derailing the conversation, Dmitry, but I'm curious because when I speak to our scouts, or maybe we're talking about a deal or in those sort of learning sessions, there's been a few times where, I mean, even the most experienced angel investor who has maybe like 16, investments in their own private portfolio, we were doing things like hidden things in term sheets, right? That you might not know about certain clauses or certain, so you're like walking through, because something about doing a scout investment is oftentimes you're not leading the deal. Like there is another investor involved and you sort of are always following. So as much as I've wanted to try to standardize it, for example, we always have to have, because I'm reviewing before we sign off on the term sheets, it's always something else that's laid down by someone else. And I can imagine from a scout's perspective, or as they're an angel investor, that maybe you read it over, but you have a level of trust, or maybe you have like a legal counselor. So that was like a really big moment, going through like the pitfalls and the hidden things of the different term sheets, where almost all of our venture scouts were like, hey, thank you. I've actually really learned something here. Not to say that they, don't, or that we don't, but this is where it's like really concretely, like I did not know this before, and I now know this and feel really comfortable doing this and in the future because I've been part of this scout program. has there been like a really concrete moment of learning for you as a scout, be it with Flashpoint or in your former role?
Yeah, of course. I think it's always, as I said, I didn't have a background in this space, and it's something that I did, firstly on the side, and then I just sort of like jumped into space. And one of the things that I did, for example, at one point was the venture deals course by Techstars, from if I'm not mistaken, and I learned a lot from there as well. But also, I learned a lot, for example, from talking with Dmitry and with the other guys in the fund, and getting feedback from them on the deal flow. Sometimes especially in the first ones, I think I didn't do probably the best job in finding the right companies, but with time, I think I understood the sort of like the core sort of like mandate and sort of like investment thesis of the fund, and got a bit better. And I think that's why I think you need sort of like the fund and the scouts to be sort of on the same page on many things, because sometimes you have a few calls, and then it's hard to sort of like represent the fund or present the thesis without constantly being in contact. For example, right now we know there's a lot of problems, let's say, in both public and private markets, and you need to constantly get some feedback from the fund. Has anything changed with us? Are we going to do less investments? Are we going to focus on different companies? Are we going to look at companies that have higher revenue or something like that? I don't know if I covered all the things that you asked me, but I hope I did.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah. Maybe we're like running out of time almost, but the last question to Dima, since we worked together for like already some time, and I remember Dima was very good at like spotting some not very obvious startups and investment opportunities, kind of spotting this underpenetrated groups of founders that are for some reason maybe under the radar for VCs, or they have just like some very significant revenue traction, but they have raised very little money. And with this like bootstrap mindset, for example, companies that are super efficient, and sometimes these companies are a bit under the radar for VCs, because you cannot just identify these companies by looking through Crunchbase, looking at how much money the company has raised. So Dima, what do you think are the best like way to find these companies, and what do you think maybe are these groups, like immigrant founders maybe, or bootstrap companies? So how would you define these different groups that are underpenetrated by VCs?
Well, I think, look, I mean, first of all, if I was a VC and I was starting a scout program, that's exactly what I want the scouts to do. I would want the scouts to find companies that I can't get a hold of. The previous panel was talking about data, right? And how they use a lot of data. They use Dealroom, they use Crunchbase, etc., right? But as you said, there are the companies that for example, the ones I brought to you, they weren't on Crunchbase, they weren't on Dealroom, because they didn't even think that they're a startup, right? Before we talked with them, they didn't even think they need to go to the VC route at all. And so I think there's a lot of companies that you don't see. And actually, I used to organize Arctic 15 that just happened in Helsinki, seeing thousands of startups all the time. And as much as I love events and startup events, I know that some of the best companies don't go there. Some of the best companies don't participate in the startup, culture, in the hype, in the things that we all love. They actually specifically don't like that, and they steer away. They don't go to startup events. They're too busy working, right? They don't do the things like everybody else does, so they don't follow the hype. And I like to look for those. And there isn't an easy answer as to say, how do you find them? One way that I look at it is that I'm very interested in people, right? Just interesting people. Some of the founders I found was literally from hobbies. Like right now, I'm talking to you from a martial arts camp, right? Like I'm literally right now, fighting. My leg is almost broken from, martial arts yesterday, and my hand is wrapped in bandage. But in this camp last year, I found an angel investor for a startup who I got to know from this camp 2 years ago, right? So like like I meet these people everywhere. Like it's my hobbies, it's the things where I go to. It's events that are not startup events. I met a cool startup at the tea ceremony, and I just talked about what they do, right? So it's really being interested in people very early on. And for me also, because I keep an interest in people, I really look for founders, and I just know somehow that like this person, he or she might find a really good company in like 3 years time. Right now they might be just working as a salesperson in a startup, but I just see the energy in them and I see the interest, so I keep in touch, I talk to them, right? A VC doesn't have that time or that luxury, and I think even most scouts don't have that time, that luxury, if your mindset is about making money. My mindset is about making friends. My mindset is about like being interested in people. So I just stick around those people, and eventually when they start companies, they you know, I know that they do. The deal that I brought to you guys a couple of years ago that unfortunately you missed out on, but that is doing really well. You know, I knew the guy from like his previous hardware company, right? And like the hardware company had nothing to do with VCs, angels, you know, our world at all. And then, you know, when he started the second company, which was much more startup like, you know, he came to me because I was his only contact to this world. So I think it's like, it's really about, you know, being human and being interested in people very early on, to me at least.
Excellent. I really love your approach. Guys, unfortunately, we need to wrap up. We're running schedule. So thank you all for such a great discussion. I'm happy to also invite you to grand finale, so a startup competition that will start in like 30 minutes. And well, happy to see you in person later this year, somewhere at the events or one of the cities we're in.
Thank you so much for organizing and for
Thanks,
having me.
Dmitry.
Thanks, Dmitry.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Madeline, Paul. Super awesome to have you.
Nice to meet you too. Bye, guys.